Jumping now to services. So let's kind of go back and just think about what we've already covered. Now that we've developed the PLAF, we know where the child is, we know where they're currently functioning, we've determined what the appropriate goals are for the child, we've considered the special factors, we've determined the appropriate accommodations and modifications. The IEP team will have a discussion on specific services to deliver the specially designed instruction. When we think about special education and related services, we want to think about what will be necessary for the child to make progress towards their IEP goals. On the document itself, it's generally presented as a table or a chart. The table will list special education or related services, such as reading comprehension, written expression, social skills, speech, and we're getting into related services, speech therapy, occupational therapy. And this is what we would define as the what in that third bullet point. So the services are going to list what the service is. The table is also going to include who's going to deliver the service. Is it going to be a special education teacher, speech therapist? Is it going to be delivered by a counselor? And whether it's a direct or consultative service. So let's talk about that quickly. Direct service is usually one-on-one in a clinical setting, like in a speech room, or a small group setting where the therapist or service provider works with the child or a small group of children. Consultative service means that the child's teacher and service provider has access to the therapist to discuss instructional strategies that teacher or service provider can address in the classroom. So consultative services, the child's not generally going to see the therapist. So that's the who. The services section is also going to include the location of the service. Is it going to be delivered in an inclusive setting in the general education classroom? Or is it going to be delivered in a resource classroom, the special ed room? Or is it going to be delivered in the speech room? So it should indicate where those services will take place. And then for how long. This will include the frequency or how often the child is going to receive the service. So 15 minutes per month, we can pretty much assume that 15 minutes per month is probably a consultative service. But then we also have 240 minutes per month, 120 minutes per week, 180 minutes per day. These are all examples of frequency that you may see in your services page. It should also have the total duration of the service, which would be from the implementation of the IEP for 1 year, would also be on that page.
Number 9 is about placement. And placement under IDEA to describe least restrictive environment is to the maximum extent appropriate. Children with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled. Removal of children with disabilities from the regular educational environment occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability of a child is such that the education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. In deciding the child's placement, the group must make sure that the child has the maximum opportunity appropriate to learn with children who do not have disabilities in academic, non-academic, and extracurricular activities. If the IEP team determines that a child needs a more restrictive placement, there should be what's called a continuum of alternative placements available for the student. So let's talk a little bit about that continuum of alternative placements. Under IDEA, in making placement decisions, the group looks to another important part of the IDEA, which is called the Continuum of Alternative Placements. And this continuum includes the different options where children can receive services. These options include placements such as a general education class, a special education class, a special education school, at home, or in a hospital or other public or private institution. If we take a look at this slide, this continuum of alternative placement, the terms used here are more specific to what families might see in Arizona. More specifically, inclusion is where a child is receiving services in a regular ed classroom. Resource is a child in a regular ed classroom for most or part of the day and receiving services in a resource room or special education classroom to work on specific skills. In a self-contained setting, this is where a classroom where all the students in the class are receiving special education services. In the special public or private day, a special school where the entire campus is dedicated to special education programs. Another option, most restrictive, would be a residential school, a school where a student lives. And then in addition to that, even more restrictive would be instruction in home or in hospitals. If the child's disability is such that they can't leave their house or hospitalized placement, the school district will send a teacher to the home to provide special education and related services.
Yeah, so what you see on our continuum of alternative placement options is that schools are never absolved of the responsibility to provide special education and related services to children who are eligible for them.
Okay, number 10, helpful meeting tips for parents. Before the meeting, request a draft, parent input, examine and review data. So let's talk about those specifically. Before the meeting, school districts and charters are not obligated to provide a draft copy of the IEP. However, this is seen as best practice in special education. In requesting a draft, a parent will want to give the school adequate notice that they would like a draft to be able to come prepared to the IEP meeting. If you have input that you'd like the team to consider on the education of your child, communicating this with the school before the meeting can be very helpful. Examining and reviewing data before the meeting can help parents be informed and active participants during the meeting. During, we can always agree to disagree agreeably, so while at the meeting, focus on all the points we can as a team to agree on to build from strengths. If we come to a point where we feel confused or that we don't fully understand, asking open-ended questions can be very helpful. Instead of asking, is my child going to receive 1 hour of speech therapy per week? Perhaps, what progress has my child made toward their speech goals? What does the current program look like? How much speech therapy and in what setting do we think is appropriate? Instead of, does my child like your class? How about, Mr. Smith, would you describe how my child functions in your class? And then after the meeting, keep that babysitter for another hour or respite provider and get some coffee or tea by yourself or with whomever you attended the meeting to debrief and discuss and develop any questions you may still have. Follow up promptly in writing with your child's support coordinator or case manager with any questions that you may have. And finally, also consider sending a thank you note to those team members.